Warden of the County of Middlesex, and pleased to be the President of the Ontario Good Roads Association. With me today...
This has a history sprinkled with all the hallmarks that one would expect from a fiscal conservative and a bona fide blue blood. She's completed a research fellowship at the Atlas Economic Research Foundation in Washington, D.C. She worked at the Fraser Institute, oversaw the war room of the Wild Rose Party during the 2012 Alberta provincial election, and served as a press secretary to Federal Minister Jason Kenney. Candace has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Alberta, and a Master's in International Relations and a Master's in International Trade and Commercial Law from Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. In favor of the resolution, by way of background, Clark was first elected as councillor in the town of Halton Hills in December 1996, representing the community of Acton. He served as a local councillor for 2 terms and was elected to Halton Regional Council in 2003 with an expanded ward that included Halton Hills rural community. These opportunities afforded Clark a wealth of experience. He sat as the Halton Region's Health and Social Services Committee Chair since 2008. He's been actively involved in the Agricultural Advisory Committee. He's worked on Poverty-Free Halton, which has been an advocate for accessible and affordable housing. And he supported transit passes for low-income earners with the idea that official plans should be inclusive of neighborhoods in building and incorporating affordable housing options. In 2008, with the support of both local and regional council, Clark was elected to the National Board of SCM, where he served on numerous committees, including infrastructure, finance, intergovernmental relations, transportation, international programs, and social economic development. He's been a member of SCM's Board of Directors and Ontario Caucus for the past 5 years, and he served as...
So the motion we're debating states that Ontario municipalities need revenue tools now. This is kind of silly, because Ontario municipalities already have revenue tools now. In fact, they have a very long list of revenue tools. There are property taxes, development charges, user fees, licenses, permits, fines, and tickets. Municipalities receive transfer funding from other levels of government, including grants and subsidies for mandated programs, the GST rebate, and countless other transfer funds. The City of Toronto has special taxation powers, which they used to impose 2 new taxes back in 2007. Toronto also has the power to levy other taxes that they don't use, such as a road tax, an advertising tax, a sin tax, and an amusement tax. Yes, you heard that one correctly, an amusement tax. I hope nobody enjoys himself too much at this conference. Otherwise, you may get dinged with an amusement tax. Say what you will about budget shortfalls, but that is quite a laundry list of revenue tools. So as far as this debate, it isn't really about Ontario municipalities needing revenue tools now, but that they want new revenue tools now. Municipalities want more cash. Essentially, there are 4 ways we can bring in money for municipalities. There's revenue sharing, borrowing, user fees, and taxes. Let's go through these options. First, transfers, or allowing municipalities to assume partial revenue from already existing taxes. For instance, getting a portion of the sales or the income tax revenue. Well, folks, one quick look at Queen's Park will tell you that the Ontario government is already broke. They don't have money left over to transfer to municipalities. And the feds just announced their multi-billion-dollar New Building Canada Fund. The federal well has been tapped, and it's dry. Next, allowing municipalities to take on more debt. Given that we owe nearly $1 trillion in combined federal and Ontario debt, we should all be very skeptical about the idea of accumulating more debt to pass on to our children. Municipalities are in much better fiscal shape than other levels of government simply because they're not given this license to spend. This is a feature, not a flaw. Next, we have user fees. User fees sound great in principle, but in practice, many proposals merely equate to double or even triple taxation. For example, a road toll. It does allow for the user pay principle, but drivers already pay for these roads with gas taxes, with driver registration fees, and with federal taxes. So slapping a toll on someone's drive to work, that's just mean. User fees should replace taxes. They should not be considered a new revenue. So after reasonably eliminating these first 3 types of revenue tools, we're left with taxes. Folks, all this talk of revenue tools often just boils down to raising taxes on households, on families, and on job creators in Ontario. Let's call a spade a spade. Be it resolved. Ontario municipalities want to raise taxes. When it comes to raising taxes and reasons against it, let's look no further than what happened right here in Toronto in 2007 when David Miller brought in 2 new taxes. The result? Well, spending continued to soar, out of control, growing over $1 billion after these taxes were introduced. The taxes were not enough to keep up with the spending, so the government still needed to hike property taxes and raise user fees to pay for everything. These 2 taxes are so broadly disliked in Toronto that one of them, the vehicle registration tax, was immediately abolished by the very next administration that took office. And ask any real estate professional in this city, and they'll tell you about the other tax, the land transfer tax, which has considerably slowed down the real estate market. It makes it more unaffordable and unrealistic for many to own a home here in Toronto. New taxes just didn't work. But that's the problem with this discussion about revenue tools. It doesn't paint the whole picture. What we should actually be debating is the ability for municipalities to pay for the governments they'd like to have. And when looking at ability to pay, we should definitely look at both sides of the ledger, revenues and expenditures. We all know the cost of government has significantly grown. And it's not just driven by new mandates. It's driven by government employee compensation, tendering contracts, and pensions. Look at the growth in our own municipalities, in expenses, number of employees, salaries of those employees, total payroll cost per employee. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation Municipal Report Card showed numerous municipalities where the number of Sunshine List employees nearly doubled in just 2 years. Pension contributions grow, and pension shortfalls and liabilities continue to threaten. We do not need more revenue tools to get bigger. We need municipalities to be more efficient. We need to be smart. We should eliminate redundancies, use market mechanisms to provide incentives, and modernize our approach to government. We should examine innovative policies from across the world to make our cities more livable. Ontario municipalities do not need new revenue tools. We need smart government. Thank you.
Topic today that Ontario municipalities need new revenue tools now to address our most pressing challenges. But before I get started, I have 2 things I have to first say. First off is I am not running to be the mayor of Toronto. It's already getting crowded enough. I'm very happy to serve the people of Halton Hills and Halton Region. And secondly, I've not done a debate like this since I was in about grade 8. And when that happened, our teacher would always give a box of Smarties to the participants, whether you won or lost. So Candace, and I'm glad no one is out there with big red balls to start throwing at me. Now, as FCM's 3rd Vice President, I would argue that this is true, not just of Ontario, but across the country. However, as a councillor for the town of Halton Hills and Halton Region, I recognize that many of the solutions to our fiscal challenges will rest with the province. I want to speak to you today about the national perspective. Municipalities in Canada collect just 8 cents out of every tax dollar in Canada. With this, we must build, operate, and maintain over 60% of Canada's public infrastructure, roads, rinks, water systems, and transit systems. FCM's infrastructure report card showed that a full third of our infrastructure is at risk. The legacy of historic investments in past decades is in jeopardy. In addition, the cracks in our housing system. We have high household debt, low vacancy rates, and $1.7 billion in expiring federal housing dollars. It makes it difficult for local governments to attract new workers, grow our communities, meet the needs of an aging population, and provide adequate housing for our most vulnerable citizens. At the heart of our municipal financial challenge is the inadequacy of the property tax system in Canada, a 19th century mechanism to tackle 21st century problems. The property tax is inelastic, it's static, and most importantly, it does not grow with economic or population growth. As the economy recovers and grows, municipal revenues are left behind. At the same time, federal, provincial, and territorial governments collect 92 cents for every dollar. 42 cents going to the federal government and 50 cents to the territorial and provincial. In short, the system takes too much out of our communities and reinvests little back in. The result is crumbling infrastructure, increased congestion, and longer commute times for Canadians, and risks of severe weather storms. The people in this room, whether they are engineers, public works staff, or elected officials, all know the strain our aging infrastructure is having on our municipal budgets. We live it each and every day. But there are signs of change at the federal levels. The Government of Canada recently announced the Building Canada Fund, $47 billion over 10 years, aimed at investing in infrastructure that will build our economy and connect Canadians. One significant element of that is the enhancement of the federal gas tax fund. It's being indexed and will deliver Canada's longest and largest infrastructure plan. The federal government has recognized the importance of predictable and stable infrastructure and the funding needed for communities. The dedicated Small Communities Fund recognizes that small, rural, and remote and northern communities need greater predictability and access to infrastructure funding. However, there are important questions remaining about how the rest of the Building Canada Fund will be used. We own the significant majority of public infrastructure, and we must be sure that we will benefit from the new Building Canada Fund. We're concerned by some of the rule changes that could force municipalities to carry a larger share of infrastructure costs in the future, as well as the eligibility for local roads and the screening process for projects structured as P3s. There's only 45 days until April 1st when the municipal construction season begins. The federal government needs to work with FCM on details of the new Building Canada Fund to ensure it delivers best value for Canadians. Unlike business, our core operations are ones with no or limited revenue streams. Our roads, parks, recreation centers, streetlights, bridges, water testing, and other public safety infrastructure are all done by municipal government for the greater good of our community. But beyond direct federal investment in our critical economic infrastructure, municipalities need access to a wider range of revenue sources if we plan to aggressively address the infrastructure challenges our communities face today. We need to have the discussion about the revenue tools. We need to make sure that municipalities have the suite of revenue tools that will fit the needs of that community. What may work in a Flin Flon, Manitoba, may not work in a Halifax. What works in a Wawa may not work in a Waterloo. We are elected, we are accountable, we are the board of directors of the corporation, and we operate in transparency. And we need to make sure that if there are revenue tools that we will be looking at, that we do that and we pick the tools that are best suited for our communities. And thank you.
Morning. Thank you for that kind introduction, Ron. It was mercifully short. I appreciate that. Let me begin by congratulating the Board of Directors of Rural Ontario Municipal. I'd like to welcome all the delegates from wherever you are across Ontario to the 2014 Roma OGRA Combined Conference. It's been a year since I first spoke at this podium, kicking off the 2013 conference. 2 weeks before last year's conference, I had just been asked to take on the municipal affairs and housing portfolio, and I had to hit the ground running. I already knew how passionate you are to get things done for the communities that you represent, and I quickly learned how engaged you all are. As a group, I really appreciate your candor. Your comments are frequently unvarnished. I like that. We all share a passion to make our communities and our province a better place. Whether it's municipal infrastructure investments or housing needs, we're all trying to find creative ways to keep costs down while delivering on the service levels that our residents expect. When it comes to our priorities and our challenges, we have a lot in common. The financial limitations we face and the strategic decisions we must consider are very similar. Just as you have tight budgets, so do we. Just as you face significant demands to help build local economies and provide services, so do we. 2 years ago, the Drummond Commission report on the reform of Ontario's public services prescribed some strong medicine to our government to restrain and transform how we spend public dollars. Our government continues to just begun. As you know, Kathleen Wynne promised to look at Ontario's issues through a local, northern, and rural lens, and that's a promise we've kept. Our government pledged to work together with Ontario's small, rural, and northern communities to keep moving forward. That means a commitment to invest in infrastructure in your municipalities. It means getting legislation passed that will help municipalities recoup millions of dollars in unpaid fines and promote responsibility for waste at the level of the individual and producer. It means following through on the commitment to review the provincial land tax, a commitment our government made in last fall's economic statement. In the coming months, the Ministry of Finance will be actively consulting with municipalities, taxpayers, and other northern stakeholders on the reforms to the provincial land tax. This is a complicated issue, and I know you have a great deal to share with me with regards to the provincial land tax, so I encourage you to share your suggestions and your ideas with the Ministry of Finance and my ministry as we undertake this important review. We're currently developing a plan to implement the recommendations of the Special Purpose Business Property Assessment Review, a report that was delivered by my colleague Stephen Del Duca last December. I know that you care about the sustainability of budgets and long-term financial matters in your municipalities, and I appreciate that the rules that guide how you invest in your municipalities needs updating. That's why last fall we launched reviews of Ontario's land use planning and appeals system and the Development Charges Act. When I spoke at the annual AMO conference in Ottawa last August, I was pleased to announce the launch of the reviews, and today I'm happy to be able to report back on their status. We held 6 workshops and roundtable consultations with municipalities, developers, and the public on proposed amendments, and we received 250 email submissions, comments, and formal written submissions on development charges, and 782 submissions for planning reform. I know that many of you participated, and I want to thank everyone for their comments. What we heard loud and clear was that the system needs a refresh. We heard from you that we need to make sure that our planning system keeps pace with the changing needs of your communities. In particular, we heard that you want more clarity and transparency in the way the system works. We heard that a simplified system, one that allows citizens to become more involved, would give increased confidence to local planning decisions. Many expressed the opinion that there are far too many appeals and that more decisions should be arrived at locally instead of in front of the Ontario Municipal Board. We heard concerns about the way growth-related infrastructure is now financed and the importance of development charges as a critical tool for financing growth-related infrastructure was highlighted by Roma, OGRA, AMO, and many others. My staff are currently reviewing and compiling submissions. I want to thank everyone who contributed ideas. We are targeting this spring to announce the changes as a result of this review. My goal is to make sure future planning and development treats all Ontarians fairly and equitably, and at the same time makes the economy stronger and creates jobs. As many of you know, the foundation of all planning comes from the provincial policy statement. Today, it gives me great pleasure to be able to announce the official release of Ontario's long-awaited 2014 provincial policy statement. The updated provincial policy statement is a result of over 3 years of intensive consultations around the province. And once again, I want to thank everyone for your advice and your valuable feedback. In particular, I'd like to express my appreciation for the views expressed by Roma, as well as AMO and NOMA, and part of the Northern and Rural Working Group. Your thoughtful input on the potential impact of the draft policies and the implementation challenges facing smaller and rural communities and municipalities was invaluable in helping shape our final product. Because of course, at the end of the day, one size does not fit all when it comes to the realities and the complexities of planning at the municipal level. This new PPS goes a long way towards recognizing the distinctive and uniqueness of rural and northern communities. It provides greater flexibility and clarity on the range of development that may occur in your communities. It's about unlocking the economic potential of rural and northern Ontario. To assist you in implementing and applying these policies, my ministry will be releasing the Northern and Rural Draft Guides for comment. And of course, my staff are always available to provide more clarification and advice. The updated PPS is a flexible tool, one that gives you more autonomy to make effective and coordinated long-range decisions based on your local priorities. Again, there's always a balance. Our government has a duty to lead on matters of provincial interest, but we know we need to balance that with your local priorities. So it's about partnership, and it's about working together. It's also about finding ways to cooperate, share information, and give you the tools that you need to manage your affairs. That's why we put so much emphasis on the development of comprehensive municipal asset management plans. They're one of the most powerful tools available to help set your community's priorities. Up-to-date asset management plans help when you're looking at ways to deliver services using shared service arrangements to reduce costs, to improve services, and by pooling resources, build your capacity to offer new services. For the past decade, the municipalities of Wawa, Chapleau, White River, Dubreuilville, Hornepayne, and Manitouwadge have joined together in a technology hub. The Northern Information Technology and Geomatics Cooperative allows member communities to harness a powerful GIS and a zoning and infrastructure database that feeds into official plans and emergency management. Data can also be provided to community organizations and businesses for their economic and tourism development purposes. Another best practice is illustrated by the townships of Chapel, Emo, and La Vallée, who prepared a joint request for proposal to update their official plan. If each of these townships had updated their official plans individually, they were each looking at a bill of about $34,000. By issuing a joint tender, they were able to cut that bill by 50%. Each township paid approximately $17,000. At the same time, we must look at innovative ways we can work together to finance our infrastructure projects. For example, through public-private partnerships or alternative financing procurement models, Infrastructure Ontario can help deliver AFP financing and help you decide if it's the best fit for your municipal needs. I don't need to tell you that infrastructure is vital to the well-being of our economy. And make no mistake, housing is as much infrastructure as transit, roads, and bridges are. And like Minister Souza has been saying in the weeks following the federal budget, we need a fair share of federal funding to support the delivery of quality public services important to all Ontarians. And this month's federal budget was stunningly disappointing. Not only are the feds reducing our transfer payments by $641 million, the way federal transfers are being allocated is disadvantaging Ontario and Ontarians. And for housing, we're getting shortchanged too. Even now, as we negotiate the extension to the investment in affordable housing, Ontario is getting 33% of federal funds, even though we're 38% of the country's population. We're not going to back down from telling Ottawa that Ontario needs its fair share. We're going to continue to be assertive in pushing the federal government to come to the table on critical issues like housing. I've been all over the province this last year repeating the same message to anyone who will listen. Canada desperately needs a federal commitment to permanent flexible funding for housing. In November, I wrote to Minister Kenny asking to discuss the expiring social housing agreements that will cost Ontario's social housing providers $1.3 billion over the next 10 years and will then evaporate to nothing by 2033. I have not yet had the courtesy of a response from Minister Kenny. As you know, these agreements have been essential for vulnerable Canadians to obtain adequate long-term housing. We can't let the feds pretend there isn't a crisis looming. People all over this province are facing the threat of homelessness. The federal government cannot absolve themselves of their responsibility. In a fair society like ours, everyone should have a decent, safe, affordable place to live, work, and raise a family. When people have a place to call their own, everything improves. Health, education, employment chances. Ensuring safe and affordable housing for all is the right thing to do for the sake of economic stability and the growth of Ontario, and in fact, all of Canada. So instead of just talking about it, I want to push the envelope, and I really need your help. Today I brought a form letter with me. I brought the letter with me today demanding that Minister Kenny put housing back on the federal agenda. staff are going to be at the back of the room handing out these letters. I'm asking for your help. I'm asking that everyone at this conference, please take a copy of the letter back to your councils. And if you believe, like I do, that housing needs to be put back on the federal agenda, you're going to sign the letter and send it to Minister Kenny. We can't wait any longer for the federal government to act. We need them to act now. Over the next couple of days, I'm looking forward to some frank discussions with you on how we can make headway on our shared agenda. Of course, I'm also looking forward to meeting old friends and building new relationships. Together, we have a job to do for Ontarians. Our job is to explore the use of new tools and new ways to strengthen local economies and strengthen and create jobs. Together, we have to make some tough decisions. We're going to have to work hard. And together, we're going to build a bright future for Ontario. So in closing, I want to echo something that Kathleen Wynne said right after she took on the job of Premier. We must create a fair society by offering the best jobs, the right opportunities, the most secure footing for the men and women who work so hard for their families and their communities. Together, let's get the job done. Have a great conference. Thank you.